Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today I want you to visualize something with me. It's a bit of a historical flashback, but it's absolutely crucial for where we are going today.
Okay.
Picture the Soviet Union in its final days. Maybe. Let's say 1989. You have the party bosses, the nomenklatura, and they're living in these incredible dachas just outside Moscow.
The golden faucet era?
Exactly. They have literal golden faucets in their bathrooms. I mean, can you imagine? They have access to Western goods, the black cars, the best food, the caviar, the whole thing.
Well, everyone else, not.
Not even close. And they're telling the public through every single loudspeaker they can find that the 5-year plan is a triumph.
Right.
That the system is invincible, that the West is crumbling, and the Soviet model is the future of humanity.
But the reality on the street is bread lines.
Right. The people are standing in the snow, waiting for basic goods. They see the cracks in the concrete. They know the factories are rusting. There's this massive, this psychic disconnect between the reality the elites are projecting and the reality the people are living.
And that can't last forever.
No, eventually that cognitive dissonance just snaps.
It's a powerful image. And, usually when we talk about that, we are talking about history. We are talking about a failed state from the 20th century.
Right, in the past.
But the provocation of today's deep dive, and it is a serious provocation, is that we aren't looking at history. We are looking in a mirror.
That is the hook. That is the scary part. We are analyzing a transcript from De Nieuwe Wereld, the New World. It is a Dutch intellectual talk show known for really heavy philosophical lifting. The speakers are Ad Verbrugge and Jelle van der Beerdenwyck. And the date is critical here. This conversation takes place in mid-February 2026.
So we are situating ourselves in a very specific moment in time, the near future, essentially. And, context is everything here.
Yes. And these two intellectuals, they have just come back from a trip. They were in Aruba in the Caribbean visiting Prime Minister Mike Gaiman.
Quite a contrast to Brussels, I imagine.
An incredible contrast. And they describe this trip almost like a dream. They are looking at cave paintings. They are experiencing this warm, cohesive culture where diplomacy and human connection still seem to work. The sun is shining. People are talking to each other. There is a sense of community. It sounds idyllic.
And then they get on a plane and fly back to the Netherlands, back to the EU.
And the word they use to describe the feeling when they land?
Grim.
Grim. That is a heavy word.
They describe a grimness that just settles over them because they are coming back to a continent that feels like it is losing its mind. They see a political establishment that is panicking, an economy that is stalling, and a geopolitical map that is, it's burning.
And that brings us back to the Soviet analogy. The core thesis here is loss of control.
Yes.
The golden faucet moment isn't just about luxury. It is about an establishment that knows, deep down, that the system is failing, but they can't admit it.
They can't.
So instead of fixing it, they double down. They tighten the screws. They try to force reality to match their spreadsheets. We have a massive stack of notes today because this conversation connects dots that usually stay in their own lanes.
Okay.
We are going to talk about the aggressive push for a European superstate. We are going to talk about the demonization of political dissent. Specifically, a case study in the Netherlands regarding the Forum for Democracy Party.
Right.
We're going to go deep into the Epstein files, which, in 2026, have apparently exploded in a way we haven't seen yet. And finally, we have to talk about the wars. Ukraine and the Middle East.
It sounds like a lot, but if you're listening, you should keep one thread in mind. The harder the system tries to clamp down, the more the sand slips through its fingers.
Let's start with that clamping down. The source material opens with a discussion on the European Industry Summit. This is happening in early 2026. You have got Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. You have got Christine Lagarde from the central bank. And the rhetoric isn't, we're doing great. The rhetoric is panic.
The narrative being pushed is existential fear. The story goes like this. Europe is too small. We are being squeezed.
Squeezed by whom?
On one side, you have China, this industrial juggernaut that can flood the market with cheap EVs and tech. On the other side, you have the United States. And remember, the political landscape in the U.S. in 2026 is shifting dramatically, which is becoming more protectionist.
So the argument from Brussels is, we are irrelevant unless we become a giant.
Exactly. Von der Leyen had a quote in the source that I think defines this entire era of EU politics. She says, "The greatest barrier of today is not outside but inside the EU."
Not outside but inside. That is a declaration of war on the member states, isn't it?
It is. She is explicitly saying that the problem isn't China's subsidies or American tariffs. The problem is that the Netherlands or Germany or France still have too much sovereignty.
The problem is diversity.
The problem is that we are fragmented. To compete, we must become a monolith.
And to become that monolith, the source outlines two main pillars of integration that are being accelerated. The first one is military. Now, we have heard about a European army for decades. It usually just means buying compatible radios. Is this different?
The source argues this is a fundamental shift in the purpose of the military. Historically, if you are a Dutch soldier or a French soldier, you fight for Volk and fatherland.
For your home.
You fight for your specific territory, your specific people, your history. It's tangible.
Right. That is the basis of the nation state. You defend your home.
But the push now is to create a force that fights for democracy in Europe. It sounds nice, but it is an abstraction.
What does that even mean on a practical level?
Well, that's the thing. You aren't defending a border. You are defending a bureaucracy. You are defending a set of European values defined by Brussels. It is a decoupling of the soldier from the soil.
That is a huge psychological leap. I can't imagine that's an easy sell to, a 20-year-old kid signing up.
Not at all. But the second pillar, the economic one, this feels like where the real mechanics of power are shifting. The capital markets union.
Okay, this is one of those terms that makes people's eyes glaze over.
Which is exactly why it is so dangerous. Capital markets union. On the surface, the pitch is incredibly seductive, especially for the business crowd.
So what is the pitch? How do they sell it to the public, to the businesses?
The pitch is, look at our startups, look at our scale-ups. If you have a brilliant tech company in Eindhoven in the Netherlands and you want to expand to Germany or France, you hit a wall.
A wall of red tape.
A huge wall. Different tax codes, different bankruptcy laws, different listing requirements for the stock market. It is friction. So Brussels says, let's smooth that out. Let's create one single financial ecosystem so money can flow freely.
I mean, playing devil's advocate here, that sounds rational. If we want to compete with Silicon Valley, don't we need a unified market? Why are Ad Verbrugge and Jill van Baardenwijk skeptical?
Because they believe the innovation pitch is a Trojan horse.
Okay.
They argue that the real goal isn't to help a startup in Brabant get funding. The real goal is to facilitate the issuance of Eurobonds or joint debt.
The Hamilton moment.
Yeah.
The thing they've been trying to get for years.
Exactly. To have a unified capital market, you need a unified safe asset, a European treasury bond. That means the debts of the member states effectively get pooled.
And that means?
It means the creditworthiness of the prudent northern countries, like the Netherlands and Germany, is used to underwrite the debts of the southern economies.
And this leads to what they call the Sick Brothers theory.
Yes, the Sick Brothers. Look at France and Italy. In this 2026 context, their economies are described as being in dire straits.
How so?
Massive debt to GDP ratios, sluggish growth, but they can't reform.
Why not? Just pass a law, right? I mean, it's not that simple, obviously, but...
Politics. If the French government tries to cut pensions or deregulate labor markets, the country burns. We have seen the protests, the yellow vests. It is political suicide.
So they are stuck.
Completely stuck. They can't devalue their currency because they don't have their own currency anymore. They can't reform internally because of the voters. So what is the only lifeline left?
A bailout from the EU.
Precisely. But you can't sell a bailout to the German or Dutch voters. They won't accept it.
No way.
So you package it as a capital markets union. You say it is about competitiveness and innovation. But functionally, it is a mechanism to transfer wealth from the north to the south to keep the Eurozone from exploding.
That is a cynical take, but it aligns with the desperation the source describes.
Yeah.
But there is a deeper critique here than just the money.
There is.
Ad Verbrugge, who is a philosopher of education, brings in this fascinating analogy from the school system.
I loved this part of the discussion. He maps the EU's strategy onto the history of Dutch education, and the parallels are striking. It really explains why this top-down approach fails.
Walk us through that. What happened to the schools?
So go back to the mid-20th century. The Dutch education system was stratified, local, and rigorous. You had the HBS, the Higher Civic School.
Okay.
It was a clear path. It worked. It took working-class kids and gave them the tools to rise up. It was rooted in the community. The principal knew every student's name.
And then came the scale revolution.
Right. In the 80s and 90s, the managerial class took over. The logic was, small schools are inefficient, let's merge them. Let's create massive educational conglomerates. Let's implement lump sum financing so managers can run schools like businesses.
The promise was efficiency, economies of scale, Bigger is better.
But the result? Chaos. Verbrugge calls it decentralized bureaucracy.
That sounds like an oxymoron.
It is. But it's perfect. You created these massive institutions where no one knew anyone's name. The teachers became cogs in a machine drowning in paperwork. The overhead costs for management skyrocketed, but the actual quality of education, the connection between teacher and student, plummeted.
And the student engagement dropped because they felt like just a number in a factory.
Exactly. They became alienated. And Verbrugge says, look at the EU. We're doing the exact same thing.
The same pattern.
We are scaling up for the sake of scale. We think that by making Europe one giant market, we will become strong like China. But just like the schools, we are actually creating a sluggish, expensive, disconnected bureaucracy that kills the very thing that made Europe successful.
Which brings us to the cultural blind spot, the idea that economies aren't just spreadsheets.
This is crucial. The bureaucrats in Brussels see the economy as a machine, adjust the interest rate here, harmonize the regulations there, and output increases.
It's an engineering mindset.
It is, but the source argues that economies are organic. They mention the Brabant region in the Netherlands specifically.
Home of ASML, the most important chip company on Earth.
Right. Why is ASML in Veldhoven? Not because of an EU directive. It is there because of the legacy of Philips, because of a specific culture of cooperation between local suppliers.
Right.
It's all trust. It's because of families that have known each other for generations. There is a high-trust environment that you cannot legislate into existence from 300 miles away.
It is the soil, not the fertilizer.
A perfect way to put it. And by forcing top-down, uniform regulations, by trying to make a company in Sicily operate exactly like a company in Eindhoven, you don't create equality. You create friction. You kill the local nuance.
And is there data on this? Does it actually work?
Well, that's the kicker. The data bears this out. The source notes that despite all this integration, the economies of North and South Europe are diverging.
So it's having the opposite effect.
Completely. They're growing further apart. The rich get richer, the poor get poor within the union.
So the plan isn't working. The golden faucet is leaking.
Right.
And usually when a plan fails and the leadership refuses to change course, you get dissent. You get people standing up and saying, hey, this is a bad idea. And that leads us to the second dark pillar of this conversation, the demonization of dissent.
If you can't win the argument on the merits, you destroy the person making the argument.
The source focuses on a specific case study. The Dutch political party, Forum voor Democratie, or FVD. Now, regardless of what our listeners think of their politics, they are populist, right-wing, Eurosceptic, the description of the media campaign against them in February 2026 is intense.
It is described as a total war. The source mentions major newspapers, De Volkskrant, The Telegraph running cartoons that are, frankly, dehumanizing.
Dehumanizing how?
Depicting the party leader with rats, using explicit Nazi symbolism.
Rats, that is straight out of historical propaganda playbooks. That is portraying someone as a disease, not a political opponent.
And that is the point. The expert uses a very specific term for this dynamic. Negative solidarity.
Negative solidarity. Unpack that. That sounds like a contradiction.
It is a brilliant concept. Imagine you are the establishment parties, the center-right, the center-left. You have been in power for decades.
Right.
But your project, the EU superstate, the energy transition, the migration policy, it is not delivering. People are unhappy. You have lost your positive narrative. You can't say vote for us because things are great.
Because things clearly aren't great. The golden faucet is dripping.
Exactly. So how do you maintain power? You find a scapegoat. You find a group that you can paint as the ultimate evil.
The other.
The other. If you can convince the public that the populist opposition are literally Nazis, then you don't need to have a better policy. You just need to be not them.
So the populace becomes a projection screen. They absorb all the sin so the establishment can feel virtuous.
It legitimizes their power without requiring them to be competent. We may be screwing up the economy, but at least we aren't those guys.
But here's where the source gets really interesting. They don't just defend the FVD.
No, they don't.
They actually offer a pretty scathing critique of the populists themselves. They don't let them off the hook for their own downfall.
No, and this adds so much credibility to the analysis. They use the Latin word puer.
Pure, meaning boy.
Yes,
Yeah.
the adolescent, the eternal teenager. They describe the behavior of the FVD leadership as fundamentally immature. They call it hubris.
In what way? What's the immature behavior?
The critique is that while FED is brilliant at diagnosing the problems, they see the EU overreach, they see the corruption, they behave like internet trolls.
Yeah.
They adopt this alt-right aesthetic from the US. They share memes that are deliberately offensive. The source mentions them flirting with figures like Nick Fuentes, who is a radioactive extremist.
So they are feeding the beast. The media wants to paint them as extremists.
Yeah.
And they go and hang out with extremists.
It is self-sabotage. It is like the smart kid in class who realizes the teacher is wrong, but instead of proving it, he throws a chair.
And he gets expelled.
Right. He gets expelled. And the tragedy, according to the source, is that this behavior allows the establishment to dismiss the content of their critique.
Right. No one is talking about their economic plan or their critique of the Eurobonds anymore. They're just talking about the latest offensive tweet.
It makes them easy targets. It's a gift to the establishment.
But the source issues a stark warning here. You might hate the FED, you might think they are clowns, but excluding them, what does that do?
Canceling them in city councils, refusing to form coalitions, treating their voters as pariahs. The source says this is incredibly dangerous.
Why? I mean, a lot of people would say that's the right thing to do.
Because those voters don't vanish. Their grievances don't vanish. If you shut them out of the democratic process, if you tell them your voice doesn't count because you voted for the wrong guy, you drive that sentiment underground, you radicalize it.
It is the pressure cooker effect.
Yeah.
If you weld the lid shut, it doesn't stop boiling. It just explodes.
And it creates a legitimacy crisis.
Yeah.
This is the key. The law is supposed to be neutral. If the public starts seeing the law and the media and the institutions as weapons used by the powerful to protect themselves,
Then they lose faith in the whole system.
then the right to the law evaporates. People stop playing by the rules because they feel the game is rigged.
And once people feel the game is rigged, well, that is when you get real instability, which is the perfect segue to the third section of this deep dive. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, shatters trust in the system quite like finding out the people at the top are involved in something truly dark.
We need to talk about the genie coming out of the bottle. We need to talk about the Epstein files.
Now, we have all seen the headlines, we've seen the flight logs, the names, but the source argues that in February 2026, the understanding of this scandal has shifted.
It has. It's no longer about a creaky guy on an island. It is about the architecture of Western power.
What does that mean? The architecture.
The source urges us to look at the network, not just the man. And they drop some names that, frankly, start me in my tracks.
Right.
We aren't just talking about Hollywood producers or American venture capitalists. We are talking about the European bureaucratic elite.
Thorbjørn Jagland.
That is the name, Thorbjørn Jagland. For those who don't know, this man's resume is the definition of the establishment.
Lay it out for us.
Former Prime Minister of Norway, former Secretary General of the Council of Europe, a member of the Nobel Committee, the people who hand out the Nobel Peace Prize.
The Council of Europe. That is the body that lectures the world on human rights.
Exactly. And the source highlights his links to the Epstein network. The implication is devastating. It suggests that this rot, as they call it, reaches into the very institutions that claim moral authority over our democracy.
They also mention Keir Starmer feeling the heat and Bill Gates. But with Gates, the source mentions something specific about the emails that were released. It wasn't just social planning.
No. The emails discussed geopolitics. They discussed the future of Ukraine, the division of land, post-war scenarios.
Wait, so you have a software billionaire and a sex trafficker discussing the partition of Ukraine in an email.
That is what the source alleges. And it reinforces this idea of the Chatham House rule world, the idea that the real decisions, the decisions about war and peace and borders, aren't made in parliaments.
No.
They're made in private clubs on private islands between people who were never elected.
But the question is why? Why build a network based on this kind of abuse? Why is the sexual abuse of minors the common thread here?
The source brings up the compromat theory.
Right.
It is the oldest trick in the intelligence playbook. Compromat. Compromising material. The theory discussed by Ad Gell is that this wasn't just a perversion club. It was a mechanism, a trap.
A honey trap.
On an industrial scale, if you get a prime minister or a CEO or a royal on tape doing something unspeakable, you own them.
You control them.
Forever. They can never go against you. The source explicitly mentions the suspicion that intelligence agencies, they name-drop the Mossad, were involved in running these operations to gather leverage over Western elites.
It is a terrifying thought that our leaders aren't just incompetent, they are compromised. They are being steered.
And this brings us back to the golden faucet. Gell makes the comparison to Gorbachev. He says, just as the Soviet people eventually realized, wait, these guys are frauds.
We're having that moment now.
The West is having that realization now. The release of these documents and the desperate panic fight by the institutions to keep other documents hidden, it signals that the control is breaking.
The genie is out of the bottle.
They can't suppress it anymore. The internet is too fast. The leaks are too big. And the source identifies Donald Trump, again, remembering this is early 2026, as the chaos agent.
Which is ironic because Trump knew Epstein. They were friends. They partied together.
He was part of that social circle for a decade, no question. But the source argues that the MAGA movement is using these revelations as a weapon.
How so?
They aren't trying to reform the Department of Justice or the FBI. They're holding up these files and saying, look, the whole system is sick, burn it down.
It is a scorched earth strategy, using the corruption of the elite to delegitimize the entire order.
And that is why the mood in Europe is grim. You have an establishment fighting for its life against a populist uprising fueled by the darkest truths imaginable.
And while this internal civil war is raging,
the actual world outside is catching fire.
Let's move to the global flashpoints. Because the source argues that our internal distraction is leading to external collapse, specifically in Ukraine and the Middle East.
The timeline the source lays out for Ukraine is tight. They call it the Trump ultimatum.
What is the ultimatum?
Peace or elections by June 2026. The source suggests that the U.S., under the shifting political winds, is basically saying, we are done. Either you find a way to end this, or we're pulling out.
And if the U.S. pulls the plug, what happens to Europe's support?
Europe is left holding the bag, and the source is brutal here. They say Europe cannot sustain the war.
But we hear all this talk about stepping up, about strategic autonomy.
Talk is cheap. We can talk about a European army all we want, but we don't have the logistics. We don't have the satellite intelligence network. We don't have the raw ammo production.
So it's a bluff.
It's a massive bluff. If the U.S. walks away, Ukraine collapses. The source describes Ukraine as being on its last legs.
So we are staring at a potential strategic defeat in Europe. But the Middle East scenario,
yeah,
that sounded even more technical and even more terrifying.
It is.
It comes down to a manufacturing number.
The Patriot missile shortage.
Give us the numbers.
Yeah.
Why is this so critical?
The source states that the U.S. production capacity for Patriot missiles is about 60 per month.
60. That is 2 a day. For the entire Western alliance.
That is the terrifying math. In a high-intensity conflict, a single battery can fire that in minutes. We have sent so much of our stock to Ukraine that the Western cupboards are bare.
And this creates a specific vulnerability in the Middle East.
A critical one.
Because if Israel and Iran go to war...
The source calls it a technical war. This won't be tanks rolling across the desert. It will be a ballistic exchange.
The missiles flying back and forth.
Iran firing hundreds of missiles at Tel Aviv, Israel firing back. And usually the U.S. sends an aircraft carrier group to sit off the coast as a deterrent.
Right. The big stick.
Right. But here is the nightmare scenario the source outlines. You park a carrier in the Persian Gulf or the Mediterranean, but you are low on interceptors. Iran fires a swarm.
The carrier's defenses are overwhelmed.
And a U.S. capital ship gets hit, maybe even sunk. A multi-billion-dollar ship with 5,000 sailors.
Oh my God.
That is the moment the world changes. That forces the U.S. into a massive, overwhelming retaliation. It is World War III, triggered not by strategy, but by a supply chain shortage.
And the source says Netanyahu might actually be pushing for this escalation.
They describe him as a cornered animal. To survive his own political scandals, he needs the state of emergency to continue. He needs the external enemy.
But what about Iran? Are they stable enough for a major war?
That's the other blind spot. The source points out that Iran is fragile. It is a powder keg of different ethnicities, hated by its own youth. A war could trigger a civil war in Iran that makes Syria look like a skirmish.
Millions of refugees, energy markets destroyed, total chaos.
Total chaos. And we are sleepwalking into it because we are too busy fighting over cartoons in the newspaper.
That is the tragedy. We are distracted by the internal rot while the external walls are breached.
It's a classic case of imperial overstretch, but it's happening in our minds first.
There is one final geopolitical note the source touches on. The dollar and Putin. And this was a bit of a contrarian take.
It was. The standard narrative is Putin the madman, the irrational actor.
Right.
But the source argues that within the Kremlin, Putin is actually the moderate.
That is hard to swallow for a lot of people. How can he be the moderate?
It is. But compared to someone like Lavrov, his foreign minister, or the hardline nationalists who want to, nuke Warsaw, the source argues Putin actually wants to preserve some relationship with the West.
So he's not trying to burn it all down?
He isn't necessarily trying to destroy the dollar. He just wants his regime to survive. He wants a seat at the table.
But our response, weaponizing the financial system, seizing assets, is forcing his hand.
Exactly. We are telling him you cannot use our system. So he has no choice but to build the BRICS alternative. We are creating the bipolar world we claim to oppose.
We're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
We are accelerating the death of the dollar by using it as a weapon.
So let's try to synthesize this massive download. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
We have an EU establishment that is trying to force a federal superstate to solve a crisis of its own making. We have a domestic population that is being demonized for asking questions. We have a moral collapse of the elite class driven by the exposure of systemic corruption.
A total loss of trust.
And we have a geopolitical reality where we simply don't have the missiles to maintain the peace.
It is a perfect storm. It is the definition of loss of control. The old world order is flailing. It is trying to hold on through scale, through exclusion, through war.
But it's not working.
No. Because the underlying structures, trust, supply chains, moral authority, they are liquidating. They're turning to dust.
It feels like we are standing on a fault line. But the source ends on a strangely poetic note, a metaphor that I actually really loved, Stilhenge.
Yes, a bit of Dutch art scene flavor to end the grimness.
Tell us about him.
The host invites listeners to an art installation in Amsterdam called Stilhenge, like Stonehenge, but made of steel. It is happening on February 20th, 2026.
And it is to view a great conjunction.
The conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. Now, I'm not an astrologer, and neither are the sources, but they use the symbolism beautifully.
What do the planets represent in this metaphor?
Saturn is structure. It is the walls, the laws, the establishment, the golden faucet. It is the concrete.
Okay, order.
And Neptune is the ocean. It is dissolution, chaos, the dream, the flood. It's the formless.
So we are witnessing the moment where the structure meets the flood.
That is the theme of our time. The rigid structures we built, the EU bureaucracy, the financial system, the media narratives, they are being dissolved by the chaos of reality, by the truth coming out.
The question is, what happens when the concrete dissolves? Do we drown, or do we learn to swim?
That is the question, and that's our final provocative thought for you. Can these institutions survive the purge? Can you fix a system that has rot in the foundation?
Or what's the alternative?
Or are we, like the people in the final days of the Soviet Union, witnessing the necessary collapse before something new can be built?
It is a heavy question, but it is one we need to ask. We can't just look at the golden faucet and pretend the water is clean.
No, we have to look at the pipes.
On that note, we are going to leave you to mull that over. Don't just read the headlines, look at the cracks in the concrete. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay curious.